we as humans always get frustrated, I think, if you can't understand somebody or if you can't communicate with them correctly or if they have a heavy accent. And I think instead of having frustration, how about let's just have compassion and just try.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. Maria Gallucci is a CODA, which stands for a child of deaf adults. As she chronicles in her new book, Raised in Silence, lessons on listening, love, and loud family dinners from a child of deaf adults. Being raised by 2 deaf parents, learning American Sign Language as her primary language, and, while still a child, helping her parents navigate the hearing world was often challenging for Maria. However, as she and I discuss, being a CODA also increased Maria's capacity to empathize and to communicate and truly connect with others, skills she uses as a parent and as a professional, and skills she hopes to foster in others through her work and this book. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. If Maria's story helps you connect with others, it might do the same for somebody else. So please like this episode and share the Talking About Kids podcast with your friends and colleagues. And now the interview.
I wanted to write the book to give a special shout out to the deaf and hard of hearing community that raised me. And so I think that I wanted readers to know the background of that everyone communicates differently. And yeah, that's why I wrote the book.
And the book you're talking about is called Raised in Silence, Lessons on Listening, Love, and Loud Family Dinners from a Child of Deaf Adults. And right off the bat, Maria, there's some phrases and acronyms that we're going to be using a lot in this discussion. So maybe you can help define them for the listeners. And let's start with the difference between deaf with a small d and deaf with a capital D.
So when you are referring to the deaf and hard of hearing community, it's the cat the big D. And then when you are referring to deaf culture, you can actually use
Got it.
the small D, yeah.
And then you also use the acronym CODA quite a bit. What does CODA stand for?
So CODA is Child of Deaf Adults. And so that's CODA. And then there's also the other CODA, which is KODA, which is Kids of Deaf Adults.
And is there a faction there? You use the C. Is there is it okay, or can it be used interchangeably?
It can be used, yeah, it can be used either way. I've always used the C for CODA, but you can use it either way.
And without giving too much of the plot of your book away, can you kind of describe your family dynamic growing up?
So to me, what it felt like growing up with deaf parents is it was normal for me because it was my
Right.
normal because my parents were things. So it was just my whole world. So my first language was ASL, which is American Sign Language. So our home was filled with visual expressive communication. And so we always had to look at each other while we were talking. And still to this day, I can't talk to anybody if they're wearing sunglasses because I have to see their
Mm.
expression. I have to see like their tone, but in their way, the tone of voice. And as I got older, I realized how unique it actually was. I believe that both, or I became like the bridge for my parents and the hearing community because I like bridged the communication gaps.
Yeah, and that the role of the child being the translator
Mhm.
for adults is something that we hear a lot in different cultures, especially children of first generation Americans. That happens to them, and that creates a very interesting relationship, not only between the child and their parents, but really between the child and the world around them. And you talk about this in your book, but when did you first realize that your experience wasn't every child in America's experience?
I think it was in kindergarten when I went to the zoo for a class field trip, and then my mom had come grab me. And I still remember Christy Coons was her name, and she was sitting
Mm.
underneath the tree. And I was talking to my mom across the parking lot because that's the one good thing about ASL is you can talk to them across any room because you can talk further away. And so I just was talking to my mom, like, come over here, like we're over by the tree, we're having lunch. And I think everybody was like staring like, oh, that's unique. Like what I didn't know that your parents were deaf. I'm like, well, yeah, because I always thought it was my normal thing. So I think that it shaped my life to be, it taught me that communication is more than words. It's about body language, presence, energy, and even the signs in between the words too.
And that section of your book, that story, contains like the first of, and I have to say, Maria, and this isn't me trying to kiss up to you or anything like that, but you have some wonderful, wonderful phrases and sentences in this book. And in that description of that kindergarten experience, you wrote, "What I wish is that more people paired their curiosity with kindness."
Hmm.
So, if I'm reading correctly, one of your thought is, it's okay to recognize that these individuals are different, but it's in how you, as the observer, explore that difference and express that curiosity. Do I have that right? And what recommendations do you have?
Yeah, no, 100%. I feel like everybody is different in their own way. And I feel like we as we as humans always get frustrated. I think if you can't understand somebody or if you can't communicate with them correctly or if they have a heavy accent. And I think instead of having frustration, how about let's just have compassion and just try. Like let's just try to communicate with them. And I feel like a lot of times people don't try that, and it's so easy to try a communication tactic with a lot of different languages, just not ASL. And so like you can grab your phone and like type out
Mm.
what you mean and just show it to them, and then they can text back, and that's how you can communicate. I think just one gesture of kindness means a whole lot to a lot of people.
And what you write actually, to caution against just looking at that difference and walking away, is you write, quote, "But when we let uncertainty turn into avoidance, we miss opportunities to connect," which again I thought was just a wonderful, wonderful sentence, Maria. And so I think that's everything that you're talking about there. But there's this other problem, and it comes up, early in the book, and then there are other hints at it throughout the course of the book, and that is that deaf adults face some real dangers, don't they? When do you feel like deaf individuals are most at danger?
I think not being able to hear anything behind them, like cars.
Mm.
So my mom actually got hit by a car one time because she didn't hear the person backing up. Where I think we take a lot of our hearing for granted, and so people can't hear somebody walking across the street. Even blind people, they can't see crossing the road. And so I think that it has taught me empathy, resilience, and how to really show up for people because I know how it feels to be left out. And I know how it feels to, because I saw my parents go through it. So I know how it feels to be not included in things because they don't think you can be included, but you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and your book starts with that story of, I think, somebody behind. I believe you're out with your mother, and somebody is trying to, I think, get through a doorway, something quite
Hmm.
innocuous, and they're talking to your mother, but they're behind your mother. Your mother doesn't know that they're
Yeah,
talking,
she
and
doesn't know. Yeah.
right, and this person's getting agitated that your mother is ignoring them or disrespecting them, right? And so even in that moment, I think that you're teaching readers, you have to have a level of empathy, or at least be imaginative enough to like believe or think of a reason why this person is acting this way that has nothing to do with offending you.
Exactly. They're not ignoring you. They just can't hear you. And I think that a lot of times people do take it personal, like, oh, this person's ignoring me. They're not like hearing me or anything. And but that's not the case. It's because they can't hear you behind them.
One of the things you mentioned in your biography about writing this too, to my listeners, is, you said that your first language was ASL, American Sign Language, right? So you learned English really as a second language. That's such an interesting experience. And tell me about, first of all, how you started to learn English, and then what that meant for you in your own linguistic development, that you were learning it second to ASL.
Yeah, so well, my mom always told us that we learned to speak English from the TV, and then I, I stutter, and I always have, but I stutter when I speak, but I don't stutter when I sign, which is unusual. And so I
Mm,
was always in speech therapy, like throughout school and everything. So we had to go to speech therapy, to learn how to speak correctly, because even now, actually, when we sign backwards. So it's like
right.
Spanish, where you do like everything backwards. And I think that, and when I talk to people, I'll say like cheese grill instead of grilled cheese. And
Mm.
never knew to this day until probably a few years ago that it was actually grilled cheese instead of cheese grill.
Well, do people ever find that to be, exotic? When we hear somebody talk with an accent and they put the adjective after the noun, for example, sometimes that can sound very exotic and mysterious. Do you ever get that benefit of doing that, Maria?
I think so. And I think that, so one of my very good friends is from Ecuador, and she obviously speaks multiple languages, and so but when I talk to her, I could talk to her extremely easy because we do everything like kind of
Mm,
backwards, and so I think it does. I think it like gives like a like, are we actually speaking incorrect English? Like I always
right.
think that I'm like, is it us that actually aren't speaking the correct English?
Well, and you also talk about how much slower verbal communication is, if I get that correctly at one part. That you find that the sign language, you get ideas across much more quickly and more fluidly.
Yeah, I can I can communicate better in ASL than I can in English. And I've always been like that. And I think it was because it is my first language. And I think a lot of people don't view ASL, like there's a lot of platforms that doesn't even have it as a language. And it actually
Right.
is a language. Like we're communicating in a different form. And I think that I'm more comfortable in ASL than I am talking to people. And I think it's because that's my first language and that's what I was raised with.
Do you think, though, that the way that the school district kind of treated your language development, and maybe how you felt with the people around you not knowing the right way to explore your identity, did that create special pressures for you growing up?
I do, and I think it only 10% of even parents who have a deaf or hard of hearing child learn sign language. So I
Yeah.
think it's very important to not make them feel isolated. And I think that when you have a deaf child or a hard of hearing child, I think that there's got to be more resources because there's not enough. Like like our school, our high school was one of the only ones that had a deaf and hard of hearing ASL program for the deaf. and hard of hearing kids. And now, obviously, the technologies is way better now, but I do believe that there's got to be more access to more learning and being inclusive for that community.
Well, there's also so much controversy about how to handle a deaf child in a household of hearing parents. And, we had the great Donna Jo Napoli on talking about kids, and we learned about the tremendous deficits that kids face when they aren't hearing and their parents do not sign with them or wait for them to be able to have a cochlear implant or something that gives them hearing before initiating language development or speech. And one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on, Maria, even before I read your book, was because you had experienced this. And in the book, you talk about this. You talk about some of people that you met as adults. I'm thinking about your friends, Stacy and Dan, individuals who were like thwarted, stopped from learning sign language, their parents didn't do that for them, which meant that they were without language for years of their life. Yeah,
Exactly.
tell
And
me about that.
I know, I think you have to remember, I think, in your own self,
Yeah,
that you can hear, so you
yeah.
can communicate, but your child cannot. And so my own personal belief, I've never believed that you should allow a child with no access to communication. And I get that they want them to be in mainstream and they want them
Mm,
to blend in with everybody else, but why?
right.
It's like what's you're going to deprive them of their own language because you want them to fit in. It's okay to be different. Like it's okay to not fit in and be different. And you don't have to be perfect in anything, but like having them be deprived is not, in my opinion, not the right way to go.
Well, and again, if people want to learn more about the science of this and the research about what happens when you do not give children access to multimodal communication when they are born deaf, go back and listen to our episodes with Donna Jo Napoli. And the statistics, the academic achievement of those individuals is so stunted. So I would really encourage you to go back and listen to that. But you have a very different experience with this because when you were raising your own children and now grandchildren, I mean, you let it out in the book, so we're going to talk about grandchildren too. You encouraged them, even though they were hearing, well, in one case, you encouraged them to have sign language. In another case, it was something they kind of picked up from the other people in your world. And what do you think that meant to them, and what did it mean to their relationships and, to their own growth?
I think it's a connection. And
Hmm.
so like Nova sign, well, all three grandkids can sign, but Nova, who's only 18 months, she communicates better in sign than she does speaking. And she's only 18 months. And so she'll always sign to me. And then even when we're at like functions or whatever, she'll pretend like she's signing and pretend like she gets that you move your hands to talk.
Yeah.
And I believe that I don't, well, when my son was going through he did ASL, and I'm like, oh, you got this. It's going to be so easy. And it's not, though. So I can't
Right.
even imagine like not knowing sign language when you were like a child, but just little simple words and simple thank you or hello, or because one of my really good friends who's deaf, we always go to a place and they always sign to her, thank you. And just the gesture of saying thank you means so much to her because they're trying
Right.
to learn the communication gap between it.
Well, I think that anybody that's traveled to a country or even to a neighborhood where English isn't the first
Hmm.
language knows how far that attempt to speak the language of the people who are living in that community, how far that gets you in terms of connection and goodwill. And by the way, I think I have to point this out because it's a funny part of the book. and here we're talking about your son Ryan, and as he is studying ASL, you learned that you speak ASL with an accent. Am I
Yeah,
getting that right, Maria?
yeah, no, exactly. I was like, he's a 4.0 student, or was, because he already graduated. But and like that was probably the first F he ever got, was me trying to help him. But I just like, because every, like the East Coast, Midwest, like and the West Coast, like they're all different, and it's like talking with an accent. Like I say favorite. I used to always do favorite, but favorite's like this way. And so I
Mhm.
think there's like different words that have different meanings depending on where you were raised.
Well, and for my listeners, she was talking. She held a sign, but then she held the sign touching her chin. That was the difference between those two that she saw. No, but I thought that was funny, and of course, it also comes back with your husband Chris, when he is trying to communicate with your father Ray, who's deaf, and just Chris learning those signs to greet Ray for the first couple of times, that made Ray, that helped the relationship with Chris, and the relationship with the father, and to his daughter's suitor. That's never an easy one, but just having the sense of learning a couple of signs, that seemed to really help him, didn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think that even just the gesture of trying to learn it, even though how many years ago it was, just the gesture of trying to learn it is huge for them, because you're just trying, like you're trying to like empathize with them or make them feel not left out. So that's a huge thing for my dad.
One of the other things, and you're very forthright about this in your book, is that at some point, your son comes out as gay, and so again, we're talking about Ryan here, and one of the things, the connections that you make, because your book not only includes the story of Ray, but it includes the story of a child of a friend of yours who is trans, and how the how your experience was shaped by the fact that you had always grown up around people and even feeling or recognizing that there are differences
Hmm.
among us, right? And so, how did your experience as a coda help you as the parent of an LGBTQ plus kid?
I think that it taught me empathy and resilience. And I
Yeah.
always saw my parents get left out. And then I always thought to myself, I will never make a human being feel that way. And so I think when he had come out, I was completely fucking with that. Well, first of all, your child's your child. I don't care what they are, trans, gay, LGBTQ, like anything.
Right.
Like it's still like your own child, and they're still a human being and they still have feelings. So I always think that you always have to remember how you made them feel. And I think that being supportive is huge for a lot of people. And I think that a lot of people don't realize just any act of meanness or kindness, like that goes a long way with somebody, especially with their mental health. So when he came out as gay, I was like, okay, like great, like we love everybody. Love is love. It doesn't matter if you're deaf, hard of hearing, LGBTQ, and anything. Like you are still a human being, and you deserve to be seen and heard like everyone else.
It was interesting because this is towards the end of your book, not the final chapters, but towards the end. And you talk about attending this conference, Dove, and this kind of goes back to one of my earlier questions to you about when are deaf children and adults most at risk of danger, because Dove actually stands for Deaf Overcoming Violence Through Empowerment.
Hmm.
And the existence of the organization implies that that deaf Americans experience violence because of their lack of hearing. Tell me about Dove and that work and what you've learned from it.
I have. learned to, well, I was raised with compassion, number one. My dad always taught me
Right.
like that's the first thing that you need to know. Like, would you ever want to be in their shoes and how would you want to be treated? So I was always like raised that way. And I think that a lot of people don't know if someone's behind them.
Mm.
And so the Dove um, charity is an amazing charity. And I think that people do get like, um, not punished, I don't want to say that word, but do get abused. I feel like more because they can't hear and they feel like
Mm.
they don't have a voice. And I feel like Dove gives people a chance to have a voice for their own self. So we always support them into, we'll get you into a home or we'll get you to anything to where you're safe. Where a lot of people, I feel like they don't think that they're safe because they don't feel like they have an outlet.
A more subtle form of danger, one that you've actually tackled in your professional life, is that being deaf, or and in some cases, all these other things that can other us, sometimes prevent us from accessing things that are good for us, that might even be good for us, our health, but maybe good for us financially. And in your own work, you've been, very active in getting deaf adults into the a home market, helping them
Yes.
navigate the world of home ownership. And again, so longtime listeners of Talking About Kids know that this has come up before, particularly around some sort of institutionalized problems with who has access to mortgages and to different neighborhoods. But it is the case that most Americans carry their wealth in their home.
Hmm.
And if you don't feel comfortable making that home purchase because you don't know if you're going to be tricked, or you don't know, like you don't know the language, or you don't know, how to negotiate, that can be a real barrier, can it? So tell me about your experience helping deaf families find homes.
So my first experience was when I was 12 with my parents, and then I saw them like I was just in the car like riding to go buy the first home, and when I got there, they had no interpreter, and
Mm.
so the closure was like handing them paperwork that they would basically have to just read and think that they would know what was going on. And I saw them struggling, and of course they can all read, like it has nothing to do with reading, but when you're actually like communicating it in your own language is completely different. And so I jumped in and was like interpreting, like, here, I'll explain the paperwork, I'll explain what they're saying. And then so I think that's why I got into real estate and we're just so young, is because I saw them struggle with that. And I thought there's no way I'm ever going to let anybody do that because they don't understand it. It's like having somebody who doesn't speak English explain everything in English.
Yeah.
And that's just not like it. You cannot have a communication gap like that. And so I advocated for years and years to have interpreters at the closing table. I'm like, you have to have an interpreter there. And finally, like now we have interpreters at the closing table. But I think when you're in the deaf culture and the deaf and hard of hearing community, you know that you need a deaf friendly home. You know their culture, so you know about that. And I've had clients say to me, like, this is so different from the first experience because I'm fluent in ASL. And so I'm able to explain everything or explain the house. And so they just feel more of a connection, I feel like, with somebody who actually does speak their language.
Which, of course, makes total sense because, by the way, as somebody who speaks English, the language that the closing documents are written in, it doesn't mean I understand the closing. I
Exactly.
need
Yeah.
somebody to explain it to me sometimes, right? And I'm a relatively bright guy, but there are things where I have questions, so you can only imagine that anybody would, right?
Right. And you can't ask you, I mean, you can write the question and write it back and forth, but to actually truly be able to buy something that's already stressful for them in the first place, because buying a home, everyone knows it's like the most stressful process of anything. And I think to have somebody who actually communicates your own language and knows about the culture, because the culture is completely different as well. I think it makes is like it makes a huge difference, and it makes them feel accepted and valued.
Your book, Raised in Silence, is also partially written like a workbook. So after each of your sections, you have reflections.
Mhm.
You also have throughout some tips. And I want everybody to buy the book. But are there some tips that you can share with listeners right now for making spaces more friendly, in particular to deaf children?
I think letting them know that I see you matters.
Mm.
Like I hear you and I see you and I know, and I will try my best to make you feel comfortable and heard and seen.
And again, like, so you've said that one of the ways to do that is to, you know, learn a few signs,
Mhm.
or at least show that you're making that effort. When you were kind of navigating this world as a young child, how did you know that an adult in your life was going to be friendly to your experience? Was there anything that you looked for in how they carried themselves, or how they communicated, or the environments they created?
Yeah, I feel like body language is like huge, like expressions and body language. And so I can tell when somebody was being compassionate or has empathy when they come up to us and like, hey,
Mm.
do you need help? Like what do you need? And I think this the simplest but most powerful thing is just to slow down and be fully present. Like make contact, like I see you. And I believe the world will feel more inclusive and compassionate and connected if we were just present.
You know, this didn't come up in your book, but I'm really curious now because, again, you mentioned several times in the book the different ways that if you are deaf or you are in a relationship with somebody who is deaf, how you kind of shut them down. And you can shut them down by keeping sunglasses on. You can shut them down by simply turning away from them. In this world where fewer and fewer people are making eye contact, even at the same dinner table, Maria,
Yes.
because they're looking at their phone and they're not looking at the person that they're with. Is this making the world more hostile to deaf individuals? I know that you say that these devices can be used. You can type things out on the screen and show it to somebody if you don't have the vocabulary for them. But I have to imagine that a world where everybody's face is looking down can seem mighty scary to deaf individuals.
Yeah, it makes them feel not included because like if you turn your back, like I always try to, now I do because my bonus mom had taught me, like if you're talking to your siblings or if you're talking to other people, sign it as well because then they don't feel included. But if you do turn your back, they feel left out. And it goes vice versa too. Like if I'm signing to somebody and I have a hearing friend with me, and I always like forget, oh, they don't know what we're talking about. So
Right.
if we can just like include like all of us and include each other, I think that'd make a huge difference and a huge impact on a lot of people's lives.
And it's actually the title of one of the final sections of your book, which is "When We All Belong, We
Mm.
All Win," which again, I think is such a beautiful turn of phrase. So, first of all, Maria, I want to thank you so much for being brave enough to write Raised in Silence, Lessons on Living, Love, and Loud Family Dinners from a Child of a Deaf Adult. And thank you for being on Talking About Kids.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope I make a difference in a lot of people's lives.
That was Maria Gallucci. More information about Maria and her book, Raised in Silence, Lessons on Listening, Love, and Loud Family Dinners from a Child of Deaf Adults, is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit talkingaboutkids.com, leave me a note. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear from you. The Talking About Kids theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.